start doing the intro at least. So hello and welcome everyone. Thanks for logging on this evening. My name is Matt Schumann. I am a programming librarian here at Cary Library. Before we begin, I just want to note a few things. If you're having any technical issues, please send me a message in the chat and I can try to resolve them. If you have any questions, please submit them either via the Q&A button or use the raise hand function, and we'll address them at the end. Lastly, this program is made possible in partnership with Lexington Human Services. We have Michelle Kelleher here representing them. She's helping out with the event. Lastly, you can purchase Lynn's new book, Tales of Al, from the Penguin Random House page, and I'll drop that link in the chat. So now onto our presenter. It's Lynne Cox, was born in Boston, Massachusetts, and grew up in Los Alamitos, California. She set open water swimming records all over the world, swimming without a wetsuit. She was inducted into the International Swimming Hall of Fame, and her articles have appeared in many publications, among them New Yorker, New York Times, Los Angeles Times Magazine. She now lives in Long Beach, California. So now, please welcome Lynne Cox.
Thank you very much, Matt. I'm really happy to be here tonight with you and to have the chance to talk to you a little bit about Tales of Al. The book I decided to write was about these water rescue dogs who were training in Milan in a lake, Iseo Carlo. And I had read about them a little bit online. And so I decided to check out a video where I saw this huge Newfoundland, a black Newfoundland, leaping out of a red helicopter into the lake, and followed by an assistant or one of the owners. He swam out with the dog. They swam over to somebody who was struggling in the water, and the dog and the owner pulled the victim to shore. And I was hooked right away. I thought, how do dogs train to do this? How do people do this? And were the dogs happy about it, or were they being forced to do it? So I started doing research to figure out how could I reach out to this group in Italy and find out more about the dogs, because to me, they were really elite athletes, because not only did they have to be able to swim in really choppy water under the air draft from a helicopter, but they also had to be able to pull somebody to shore. Through connections, I reached out to a friend who had been involved with the U.S. Air Force, a friend named John Chalice, who'd been an Air Force pilot. He had mentioned that he knew somebody at the U.S. Embassy who was the naval attaché. And I'd heard that this group in Italy worked with the Italian Coast Guard. And so I thought maybe the people at the U.S. Embassy will know the people up in Italy, in northern Italy. So I reached out to the U.S. Embassy, and a day later, I got a message from the U.S. Embassy saying that there was a woman named Donatella Pasquale, who was the vice president of the school, who spoke pretty fluent English, and that she was inviting me to come to Italy to watch the dogs train. So it took me just a second to think about, yes, I want to go there. And so a few weeks later, actually, I packed my bags and flew to Italy, and Donatella met me with her dog, Al. At that time, Al was a 2-year-old Newfoundland, and she was about 120 pounds, and she was big and furry and brown with golden eyes. And I'd never seen a Newfoundland like that. When I grew up in New Hampshire, there was neighbors that had 2 big black Newfoundlands. And when I was writing my book, Swimming to Antarctica, I wound up dog sitting for my friends. They had 3 Newfoundlands, 2 Landseers that were black and white, and 1 big black Newfoundland. And so I had been around them before, and I really appreciated the size and gentleness of the dogs, but I also realized that they could be pretty protective. So I was introduced to Al. She jumped out of the crate in the back of the SUV, and she was so happy to see me. Her whole body was wagging, and she was just smiling. And Donatella was trying to get her to calm down, but she was sort of bouncing up and down. And I would discover within a short time that Al was not the dog that Donatella wanted her to be. In fact, Donatella had had a dog named Alicia, who had been a champion rescue dog, water rescue dog, She had leaped out of a helicopter. She'd been followed on Italian television. She'd been made a big part of Japanese television. She'd been followed all over Europe. She had gotten silver cups. And so Donatella had gotten Al toward the end of Alicia's life, hoping that not only she could teach Al to become a water rescue dog, but Alicia could help Donatella teach Al. And this was so interesting to me because I never realized that dogs can learn from other dogs, and that dogs can help train them to become water rescue dogs. The first day I arrived in Italy, I was taken by Donatella to this lake where this group of people were training their Newfoundlands, Labradors, Golden Retrievers, German Shepherds, Leonbergers, which I had never seen before. They were giant dogs that had been bred in Germany to be mascots for the town of Leonberg, Germany. And they sort of looked like a lion. They had a big sort of front mane that was colored reddish. And they also had Italian Spinoni, which were hunting dogs specifically bred in Italy to hunt. But these dogs were also being trained as water rescue dogs. One of the greatest treats I had was to be asked if I would like to go in and train with Mas, who was an elite water rescue dog. She was the standard, the one that everyone was trying to be like. And so what happened was I was instructed to swim about 50 meters offshore, backstroke or freestyle, whatever, and wait for Mas to come out and rescue me. But before she did that, I was supposed to raise my arms up as if I was struggling. And on cue, when Mas saw me raising my arms, her owner, who was the head of the school, Ferruccio Palega, let Mas go. And Mas swam out so fast, and she started swimming around me in a circle, but she kept a distance, and she looked at me, and she moved in a little closer, and she saw that I wasn't afraid of her. So then she came in very close, and I was able to hold on to a handhold on her harness, and she pulled me to shore. And I was thinking that, she's going to be struggling because I'm not a little person. And there was no problem. She had been training really hard, and it was like she was not pulling anyone ashore. Got to the beach, and I was asking Ferruccio, why did she circle me first? And Ferruccio explained that the dogs at the school had been trained to respect people, to realize that there are certain people that might be afraid of dogs, or that culturally were told that dogs could attack them. So Mas was making sure that I wasn't afraid of her. And after we did that the first time, Mas asked me basically, and Ferruccio asked me if I'd like to do that again. So I swam out, raised my arms, and Mas came right around and presented the harness to me right away this time. And I decided to test her. After a few yards or so, I let go of the harness, and she immediately felt the lack of resistance. She swam around me and presented the harness to me again. And I was thinking all this time, how do you train a dog to do this? I mean, this is not just a simple skill, because the dog is watching you, alert to you, watching your responses, and correcting for you. So I held back onto her harness. And the third time I let go, once again testing her, she came around me and looked at me like, don't you know you're supposed to hold on? And so I held on to her harness again, and she pulled me to shore. One of the things that happened with Al, Donatella's dog, was that she was trying to train her 2-year-old brown Newfoundland to be a dog like Mas. And Al wasn't getting it. And so I saw this interplay between Donatella and Al, and saw Donatella's patience with Al and her resolve and her consistency. But there was times where you could see that she was really frustrated. And during this time with this group that were training not just Newfoundlands, but the Labradors and the Golden Retrievers and the German Shepherds and the other breeds of dogs, often instructors and owners at the school would swap dogs, so that if you had a dog that understood how to do a certain thing, but the other person's dog wasn't understanding it, you would take the other person's dog and work with the Golden Retriever or the Labrador and help to train the dog. And I was also told what was really interesting is that they intentionally swap dogs often so that the dogs learned to read different people and they didn't always key in on the instructor of the school or key in on their owner. The time that I spent with the dogs was really fun because it was like being with champion athletes that were training and also intermediate and beginning athletes because some of the school members were just starting out. They were puppies or they were older dogs that hadn't been at the school for very long. And the reason I really wrote about this group, in addition to wanting to see how these elite athletes trained or young athletes became better athletes, was because I thought it was so amazing that this group in Italy were training the dogs to patrol the beaches in Italy and around the coastlines and also around the lakes to make sure that people were safe. And they were doing this voluntarily. There was somebody recently that was asking me, why do you need to have dogs on the beach? Because you have lifeguards. Well, there's some places that don't have lifeguards, but also these dogs are really trained to be able to pull in a number of people. If a Labrador and a Golden Retriever, a German Shepherd, or a Leonberger are in great shape, they can usually pull in 2 or 3 people at a time. With Al, when she would get on and become a very powerful swimmer, she had the potential of pulling in 6 people at a time. So the dogs were really great for that purpose. But by having extra eyes on the water and dogs that were able to see what was happening and react, that really made the waterway safer. I also thought it was so interesting that this group, although they're volunteers, often work along with the Italian Coast Guard and also with the Italian Air Force. They go on patrols with them. And they also, some of the group has dogs that will go out and do search and rescue. When they go out with the Italian Coast Guard, they're required to do certain tests to make sure they're at a certain level. And that made me really smile because if you've been with US Coast Guard people before, and I have, and I've learned so much from them, they're constantly training, they're constantly going through tests, they're constantly either maintaining their skill level or bringing it to a higher level. So it was interesting to me to see that the dogs were doing the same thing. The conflict that I saw when I was in Italy was that Al was this sweet, beautiful, kind, and gentle dog, but she was too exuberant. And Donatella was vice president of the school, and she had been a trainer there for probably about 20 years. And she was a real dog whisperer. She knew how to read dogs. She knew how to help them. She knew how to work with trainers and owners and help bring out the best in their dogs. But Al just didn't seem to be getting it. So I watched how she interacted with her. And what she did was something that I saw with some of the best coaches in my life. When I was training to swim across the English Channel, I was 14 years old. And my coach saw that I had this ability to go long distances and the pool was too short for me. So what he did is he adapted the pool swimming workouts that he was doing for Olympic swimmers for me to swim in the open water. And so by doing that, I was able to do a lot more distance, train a lot more harder, learn how to sprint and go through currents. So what Donatella did with Al was that same kind of approach to a certain level. And then when she couldn't get it, then she'd back away and try to do something else where Al would succeed. The story is a lot focused on Al, but I've also written about the dogs I've loved and swum with in my life and the people that have had traumatic events where they were trying to learn to swim and were not given good swimming instructors, and how dogs were used as a way to encourage them to reach a higher level and to be comfortable in the water. I really loved writing this book. It was so much fun. I've never had that experience before. My first book, Swimming to Antarctica, took 21 years to get published, and it became a New York Times bestseller. But at times it was really frustrating because I went through 11 rewrites. Grayson, my second book, was a lot shorter in writing. It took about 8 months, and then it went through the editing process. And after that, I wrote 4 more books, and this is my 7th book. And so when I started to decide to write the story, I would wake up at 3 a.m, full of ideas and energy. I couldn't sleep. So I finally just told myself, go ahead and get up and write. So I started writing the story about Al and about her interrelationships and about the characters in the book. And then the story started expanding because I started thinking more about, what was it like for a dog to leap into the water when they were 10 or 12 feet off the water? The impact is so hard, it hurts, because I drew on my own experiences of jumping off the 10-meter platform at the Belmont Plaza Pool in Long Beach. And I hit the water so hard that I decided I never wanted to do it again. So how do they train the dogs to do this? How do the dogs learn to hold their breaths? There was one really curious thing I saw when I was with one of the golden retrievers. She was swimming in the water with her owner, and suddenly I looked over at her and she was blowing bubbles in the water. And if you've ever been around somebody that's learning to swim or you've taught them to swim, that's the most elemental thing and the most important thing is breath control. And so when I saw her doing this, I realized that not only was she blowing bubbles, but by putting her head forward, she was lifting up her hips, and that made her more hydrodynamic, and that made it so much easier for her to swim. So when she was towing somebody into shore, she had it easier than the other dogs that were swimming with their head up. I spent about 10 days in Italy just being around this group and learning from them. And one of the things you do when you're an athlete is you work out hard, or you go to a swim meet, or if you're doing a triathlon, you go and do the competition, or any big event, even a dog show. You do all this energy and then you're done with it. And instead of just going home, you get together with friends and you have a debriefing. Well, in Italy, they don't only debrief, but they have a tailgate picnic with your dogs. And so we sat outside under these huge pine trees and had a wonderful picnic and talked about how the dogs lived, where they lived, what their training was like, how the people helped each other out with the training, but also how if you went away on a vacation and you need somebody to dog sit, somebody in the group was already there to help out. Part of the story I told was over this elaborate Northern Italian meal. It was a time when I was able to gather together with Donatella Ferruccio Palenga and a man named Roberto, who was part of this group. And we talked all about their training, their philosophy, the life in Italy. And so this book became part memoir, part athletic experience, part travel to Italy, and a large part about the Italian cuisine. I wrote the story because the kernel or the core of it is really about love and courage and trust and patience and trying to achieve excellence. And I really wanted to bring a story into the world that was joyful at a time when there's so much noise and so much confusion and so much stuff going on in the world. It just felt like it was the right time to tell the story. And so I think now, if you're ready to do some question and answer, I would be really happy to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That was so fascinating. All the little stories. Michelle, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
Sure. There's a question in the Q&A. What would the dog do what do you think the dog would do if it sensed the person being rescued was afraid of it?
The dog would back away, and the owner, who had been trained as a lifeguard, would move in and pull the person that was afraid of the dog. So the dog was never just there alone. The owner or the trainer, as part of the school, was always there as well. But in June, I've got to look this up, but it was in either June or July last year, there were 14 children on inflatable rafts somewhere off the coast of Italy near Rome, where the 14 children had been sucked out or pushed out by strong winds. And there were 2 Labradors, along with their owners, who were part of the school, who noticed a woman out there waving for help. and the two Labradors and their owners were able to pull in all 14 children. So it was really fantastic to have that happen. But what it also says is that they're not just there to rescue people, they're also watching the water to prevent something from happening. So often they'll intercede ahead of having a rescue being needed, or they'll alert a lifeguard. If the beaches are super crowded, just having more eyes on the water and noticing that something is going on can then help alert the professional lifeguard from coming in. But also in many places in Italy, there are not always professional lifeguards. So again, this group of people, like a lot of search and rescue people, go out, learn, train, work with their dogs, and do this out of the kindness of their heart. And I think that was something that I really wanted to talk about, that there are some extraordinary people that do this for other people.
Thank you. Just as I should have said this before we started the questions, if you want to submit a question, you can write it in the chat or just raise your hand and I can elevate you to be able to talk. So next question that came in is, how long does the training for the dogs usually take?
Well, each dog is really an individual. And that's what I also learned, that, and actually very recently, I was talking to a woman who was in the United States, who was training her two Newfoundlands to become water rescue dogs. And they have a whole set of requirements that are different than in Italy. And apparently the 6-month-old dog was learning how to become rescue dog at 6 months, which was really unusual. And her 10-year-old dog was having nothing to do with it until recently. She decided that she'd go out and pull in a line. The same thing happened in Italy, where the people that were working with the dogs, there was no one set method for training the dog. I mean, there were certain criteria, but one dog may respond quicker than another. One dog may learn faster than the other. And it really didn't depend on age. It depended a lot on the dog's motivation. And also, if they were interested in doing it. And that's what I thought was really interesting, is that if the dog didn't want to do this, the dog didn't have to participate. There was never a time where you had an owner that was forcing the dog into the water or forcing the dog onto one of the boats. The dogs would be standing on shore, barking like crazy, basically saying, let me in, let me in, let me in. I want to swim. I want to do the rescue. I want to be there. And actually, if you ever do look at the clip that you can see that I watched initially of the Newfoundland leaping out of the helicopter into the water, you can see the dogs standing in line, waiting for their turn, and their tails are wagging, they're barking, and they're excited. So that was what was an answer to one of my questions, because I didn't think it was really great if the dogs didn't want to do this, if they were being forced to it. Because I'd also seen through the course of my life swimming parents that were pressuring the kids to reach a certain level, and they really weren't interested in doing it. And I really like that the dogs had the ability to choose.
I love the parallels you've drawn between the human and dog with the different experiences, how we put the same kind of expectations on them. So.
It's true. It's so true. So there's a comment which I think is cute. My apartment complex has an outdoor pool, and on the day it's closed for the season, they let the dogs in. It's so cute and interesting to see how different breeds approach the pool. Some just dove in and some were hesitant.
It sounds like it would be great to see that dog pool party.
I know.
What a great way to end the summer,
Yes.
Someone asked, can any dogs of those breeds be trained to do this, or do some flunk? If so, what separates the successes from the failures? And you might have already kind of talked about this.
No, that's a great question. There are certain criteria, certain standards all the dogs have to meet, and the training just goes on. So it's sort of like competing in a swim meet or a track meet. You have a great coach who's working with you, and sometimes you're able to run or swim or cycle fast enough, and other times you aren't, or you haven't reached that standard. So the training is ongoing, but the younger dogs or the less experienced dogs don't start out at a really high level of training. They start off just learning to swim, and that's all done in a very positive and reassuring way. They're never thrown into the water. They're treated with a lot of love and respect. When they're training the dogs and they reach a certain sort of mid-level, sort of, like an age group swim team or an age group track team or whatever, then the endurance they have is they work more on endurance and sprinting. And then when they're training to become the elite rescue dog, some of those dogs can swim up to a mile with no problem, but their owners also are in training with them. So it's an ongoing process, and they train in Italy from spring till fall in the water. And then the lakes where they train freeze over and they can't do any water time in the wintertime. So I think that they're mostly doing hiking and walking and trying to keep in shape that way.
Do the dogs need a special diet? They must use a lot of energy, calories to pull and swim in different water environments.
Yeah, actually, Donatella had her dog on a special brand of dog food that she got, and that was the only dog food that she fed her dog, and it was Italian brand. And she basically said that she didn't want to introduce any other food to her. That different people have different philosophies on the best dog food, and I am not up on that. I don't know enough about it.
I guess if it's not broke, why fix it? Whatever the saying is. How long can the dogs do this work once they've been trained, and do they miss it after they retire? That's a good question.
That's a really great question. Well, actually, as far as from what I saw, the dogs that love it never retire. They go and train year after year with each other, because it's not only a social time for the owners and the instructors and the school members. It's a social time for the dogs.
Yeah.
And so instead of going to a park for the dogs to play, they go to the water for the dogs to play and to learn and to be with the owners. And from what I saw, there are these really beautiful and deep connections that are made between the owners and their dogs. I mean, there's a point where Donatella now tells me that when she's with Al, she can glance a certain way and Al will know exactly what it is that Donatella wants from her.
Wow.
And vice versa. And she said that sometimes Al will anticipate whatever it is she's going to ask. She's already doing it. So it's amazing, because just through these close exercises and drills and time together, the human and dog relationship becomes so strong, and they become, best friends or family members.
Is training done in other countries too? And is there an organization that does it in the US?
Yes, actually, the Newfoundland Club of America does the training, and there are places throughout the United States where people train their dogs in the water, and they also put them through different tests. And the Newfoundland Club of America is probably the best place to get in touch with to find out more about that. They also do this in Canada, where they have the Canadian Newfoundland Club, the Newfoundland Club of Canada. But their tests are different and their training methods are different. And in fact, at one point, I had been talking to Donatella and Ferruccio, and they said at first they thought it was their dream to bring their Italian Newfoundlands to Newfoundland to be able to train with the Newfoundlands in Newfoundland and other Canadian Newfoundlands. But they quickly realized that when the dogs are training in Italy, they're training in very warm water. It was like 80 degrees in the lake when I was there. The water temperatures start to drop into the fall, but I don't think they get below the 60s. And off the coast of Newfoundland, when I was there a few years ago in May, the water temperature was maybe 42. And I don't think it warms up that much in the summertime. So they decided in Italy that it might not be the right time to bring their dogs to Newfoundland, but maybe at some point it'll be, they'll train in the fall and they'll be able to go to Newfoundland, because the Gulf Stream goes north as far as the very southern tip of Newfoundland. And maybe there'll be a possibility that the water will be warm enough for them to do a joint training, which would be really cool, because, Newfoundlands are originally from Newfoundland.
Interesting. I'm going to combine two questions because I think that they're close. But this one person said that they have had Newfoundlands in their life for the past 30 years, And you mentioned other breeds being trained in Italy. Does any one breed stand out as excelling? And then the question I'm combining is, do they breed dogs specifically for this task, or are they just pets?
So the dogs that okay, so the Labradors were gung ho to be participating, always eager, always ready. The temperaments were different, and I'm really generalizing because different dogs are different, just like people. But I watched the golden retrievers, and they were just so relaxed in the water. They were like these little old ladies, and you could imagine them putting on flower caps, just swimming like this, just paddling along, totally at leisure. And they seemed to be able to just keep going forever because they didn't seem to be working hard. The Labradors would paddle much quicker and put more energy into it, but they could sprint and they were really fast. I was so surprised to watch the German Shepherds because I hadn't expected them to be water rescue dogs at all. I think of them as, helping with the police or doing search and rescue or canine support or something. But the German Shepherds seemed to enjoy being in the water, but they didn't seem as at ease as the Golden Retrievers. I didn't get a chance to see the Leonbergers, and I didn't get a chance to see the Spinoni, but I've heard that they do well as well. I think once again, each dog was really different, and the level they achieve, a lot depends on the dog itself, just like a human being. Shirley Babashoff was this incredible sprinter that I knew of when I was a kid, and her stroke was not a beautiful stroke, but she was an Olympic gold medalist. And then you can have somebody else that is a really beautiful swimmer, but she didn't put out as much energy, or he didn't achieve the same level. The dogs, from what I understand, are not bred specifically to be water rescue dogs, but I just found out recently from Bettina, who's featured in this book, because Al was initially bred in Belgium by Bettina. Salomon, I think is how you say her last name. And Bettina explained to me that there are certain lines of Newfoundlands that have that gene to be water rescue dogs or to enjoy the water. But there are a lot of Newfoundlands that don't like the water at all. And that really surprised me because their roots came from being transported on fishing ships in the 16th century from Spain and other parts of Europe, and then arriving in Newfoundland and breeding and becoming this huge dog that was used pulling fishing lines.
That's fascinating. Wow.
So are the dogs initially motivated by treats, praise, or play?
That's a great question. The dogs were motivated by praise and by play. They were not fed lots of treats, although at the end of the training sessions, they were given treats along with their owners. We would sit down on big blankets and the dogs would sprawl out as if they'd gone through, and they had through big workouts, and they were really tired, and they would, wait for somebody to give them their special dog treat that had been approved by everybody. And the other thing that I thought was so interesting was that Labradors were bred to have big, loose lips. And so a lot of times people do not like that because they slobber, but the reason they were bred to have the loose lips is because they were used to pull in the fishing lines. And they were big, heavy ropes, and they had to be able to put those ropes in their mouths and at the same time breathe. There are now Newfoundlands that are bred to be dry mouths because they don't have to have that same talent any longer. And the dogs that I saw in Italy, some of them would drool, others wouldn't. But the ones that would drool had little bibs on them, or if you had a dog that started a drool and you were sitting next to a friend, the friend would pull out a handkerchief and wipe the dog's face off. And to me, that was like the group taking care of each other. It was really sweet.
We have a couple more questions if you have time. One is, did you give people you were working with in Italy a version of the book before it went to the publisher?
No, I didn't give the book to the Italians before it went to the publisher. I wrote it a lot in conjunction with Donatella. I would contact her to clarify certain things that I had learned and also to be able to expand on things that I didn't know that she would know about the breed and about teaching the dogs. And then a lot of the conversation was at first difficult because I was going through a friend in Rome to translate my emails into Italian to then then they'd go to Donatella in Milan, and then she would send them to a friend in Rome who would then send them back to me. And that became really difficult. So I started using Google Translate, English, Italian, and Italian English, and it worked really well. I mean, I wouldn't do legal documents with it at all, but the gist of what we were trying to say to each other was pretty clear. And there was one point within the book where my editor, Vicki Wilson, decided to put color photos. And so I went back to Donatella to say, do you have any pictures of Al and the other dogs and how they train and the puppies and all that? So she supplied all these photos for the insert of the book, which are spectacular. They're so good. And she also helped. I had to caption all of them, and I had to then get back in touch with her to make sure that the captions were correct and that the placement of the dog in each picture was the dog's name that went with the name. And so we worked together a lot on the book, and I'm actually sending off the first copy of it, of the English version, to her on Saturday. And my hope is that it may be translated into Italian, because Grayson, my second book that I wrote, was translated into Italian and 22 other languages. And so it'd be really fantastic to be invited back there to see the members of the school and the dogs and see how they progressed, but also to be back there to sample more of the cuisine.
Did any of the dogs see you swim? And did you get a sense that they may have recognized your skill?
That's funny. That's a great question. The dogs saw me swim. And actually, when they saw me go into the water and swim freestyle, you could see them on the beach, and they stopped whatever they were doing and started watching me. And I just thought, this is incredible. I mean, It was like there wasn't anyone else in the water in that area, and they were just watching to see if I was struggling. And thankfully I wasn't, because I might have had a whole pack of dogs coming out to get me. Oh, it was fun.
So maybe this can be the last question. Would you be able to talk about the writing process for this book, what it was like versus writing Grayson? There's an experiential piece and a research piece, both to integrate into your storytelling. They also said, thanks for the really enjoyable books that as an open water swimmer, I really enjoy, but my kids enjoy too.
Thank you so much. That was such a great question. This book required a lot of research initially, just to figure out where to go, how to get there, who to get in touch with. And then once I made the connection with Donatella, then I learned from just being on site more than I could ever have learned by staying home. Then once I got home, I had to do a lot more research about the dogs, the different breeds, to be able to also explain how they looked, how they reacted, what their fur color was. So there were details that I added to the book. And then there were things that I just didn't know about. So I reached out to people that had Newfoundlands, but primarily Donatella and Ferruccio, to find out about their methods for training or how they worked with a reluctant dog. And I was told that none of the dogs at the school are reluctant, that they're eager to learn. But I think that's partly because when a dog's in a group like that, it's sort of like being on a team. You know, you're part of the team and you want to participate and you want to do it. And so, you know, part of my learning and being able to write the book was because I was also drawing upon these long ago experiences and pulled it back into what I knew about training and what I learned from great coaches and other amazing swimmers in the world. And now I was in a different venue and I could look at what they were doing. And one of the greatest things that I saw was that whole reinforcement of success. The dogs didn't ever fail. They might not get the skill today. So you back up and you do something where they succeed that day, and then come to this, whatever it was you were trying to teach the dog again another time. And that takes a lot of patience and reassurance, and realizing that maybe it's not the dog, maybe it's you that needs to figure out how to teach differently. And so I wrote about some of that, but the research was fun and writing the book was fun. And I tried to do things within this book that I hadn't done before. Like, how do you describe a wave musically? How do you do that? Because when you hear a wave breaking, there's all sorts of sound to it, and there's speed to it, and there's distance. And so, when I was writing the book, I was trying to write artfully and try to write thoughtfully and describe situations that I'd never been in before. But what I wanted to do is immerse the reader beside me so they would be able to have that experience too.
Wow. Well, it's absolutely fascinating. Thank you for taking time from your tour to stop by virtually at our library and to answer all these questions and share these stories. Michelle, did you have any last? I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
I know. I just want to say thank you so much. It's always so great to see you. The pictures in this book make it just so much more real for me. I'm a visual person, so I think that the pictures really enhance the book, and it's a tremendous book. It's great.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because when I was writing the book, I mentioned to you that I was working on it, and you first said, "That's great. Are you going to have pictures?" So I'm so glad that you like them. And some of them were pretty old pictures, and it was really fantastic. The people at Knopf, Annie Hughes in particular, who's the mastermind of bookmaking at Knopf, figured out how to bring the pictures alive. And I'm really glad that you like them, Michelle. I hope everyone else does too.
Yes, I think it just brings it alive. It does. Speaking of dogs.
Well, thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Lynn. Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. This program is recorded and will be on the library YouTube channel in the next coming days. So thank you again, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you very much, Matt, Michelle, and all of you who came to listen or watch. Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck.
Good luck. Take care.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye.